we're taking up that great reverse. God loves our questions, and He likes us to ask questions because He wants us to engage Him. He understands that we're finite beings, so we're going to have questions to the infinite. But He also understands the limits of those questions, and He comes and asks us questions. And those questions, they kind of define life. They kind of surmise the big issues that we have to understand about who we are and who God is and how we even understand life. And last week we looked at the first of those questions, and it comes to Adam and Eve as they've chosen to kind of go out on their own and kind of defy God. And then suddenly they're found in their nakedness and feeling the shame. And so it says they cover themselves with fig leaves, hide behind a bush, and God comes and remember what He asks? Where are you? Do you really understand now where you are? You're not in relationship to me. You're living outside of the very existence of life. And grand question, but quickly another one emerges. And it emerges in the narrative that follows as they have offspring. And He comes to them after a certain incident we'll read about. And He says, where is your brother? I just want to let you think for a moment on that. I find that as I let God speak to me and I sit before this grand question, where's your brother? That it just starts to kind of penetrate more deeply and more into more nuances and challenges. You know, you might initially go, my brother lives in Michigan. That's where he is. Or, my brother passed away a few years ago. But you start to realize, no, he's not really talking about just really where's your blood brother. But where is the brother that you should be relating to as a brother in co-humanity together in this God-intended family that we are a part of in humanity? Where are they and in what shape are they in? How are you relating to them? And we start thinking maybe about some of the people we pass by and some of the people we're in conflict with. Some of the people we feel so different with that we kind of, don't think kindly of. We start to realize the question. And what I do is just invite you to pray with me for just a second as we delve into this a little bit deeper. But let's just ask God to help us to really hear the question. Father, we're here in this room, and I believe we are here as daughters of you and sons. We're those who are co-image bearers of you. We bear your image. And now you're asking us about our brothers and sisters. And we pray today that we would allow you to not merely try to feel good, but actually to really move forward in where that question is leading us to. That we might discover more truly who we are and who others are. As we hear how you engaged Cain and you still come to engage us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we encountered this question in the context of the offspring from Adam and Eve, and there may have been more offspring. These may be kind of two representations or two even symbolic figures given to us. We don't know. There's kind of this poetic quality here at the early part of Genesis, but there is these two, Cain and Abel, and you probably may be familiar if you know anything of the scriptures of them and what's going to unfold. But I invite you to follow with me for the first time or afresh. You can do so on the screen or on the insert that's in your bulletin, or just listen as we pick up in chapter 4 of Genesis, verses 3 through 13, where we read, "In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. But Abel, his brother, brought fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, 'Why are you angry? And why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it.' Now Cain said to his brother Abel, 'Let's go out to the field.' And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is more than I can bear. Wow, there's so much drama here, and there's more that God does to meet Cain in this moment that unfolds, as he always does. God seems to tell us of the problem and then continues to work with humanity in meeting that need as he does with Cain. But here we see this kind of dramatic thing. We might think, wow, gosh, people are really messed up in the Bible, and not realize just how much this is our story. This really is a reflection of where we can find ourselves, and the question comes to us. And I think the context alone kind of summarizes the big picture of where we are. Because what we see is that as soon as our foreparents in human history have this broken relationship with God, things suddenly break down between they and how they see others. So to put it this way, when we are no longer living in union with this very source of security and significance, immediately how we see others is corrupted, and it's sown in conflict. And that's what kind of emerges. I mean, this is just right after this kind of broken relationship with God. Here comes the broken relationship between these two. And we start to see how much this really is the human story and what it's running through us today. And it starts with telling us about two brothers who have differences. They're different. Did you get that part? Because when you're different, that's the beginning of where things can be a little hard. Either differences are awesome and just something we celebrate, or somehow, not by their nature, but by our nature, we start to feel threat with them. And so you have two brothers. And we know that Abel is a herdsman and Cain is a farmer. And so you have these two, and they're bringing their offerings to God at this point. And what we discover is that Abel's offering is seen with favor by God. But Cain's is not. And at that point, something sets off in him, and we start to kind of see more of kind of something going on in him. And there's a lot of questions as to why did God not look with the same favor upon Cain's offering? It's a natural question. And there's hints of different possibilities in this, and they may all have some bearing of truth. For one, it says that Abel brought an offering of an animal, and some believe that God had already made it clear that life had to be given for life. The offering for sin, for our wrong with God, had to have a life given for it, and Abel had brought that, and Cain had not. So maybe it really just missed that mark. But others would note that it said that Abel brought the very best, the fat portions. He brought the very best. And then when it speaks of Cain's offering, it says he just brought some. And so maybe it starts to hint at the casualness of by which he's coming. I think that does point to what becomes very clear. As soon as we start to hear Cain engaging God, you start to hear something, or if you look back, you probably will, where you start to realize Cain has kind of a dismissive heart towards God. He doesn't even really want to talk to God. As soon as God engages him, he's like, what's up? He doesn't want to hear him. He doesn't want to answer questions. He wants to give questions. And you start to thinking, if he's that dismissive towards God, why is he even bringing an offering in the first place? This guy doesn't even seem interested in God, let alone bringing an offering. It seems kind of, something doesn't fit. But actually, as strange as it is, it's not so unusual, is it? As I read that, I think, yeah, I could do that too. I can learn how to kind of go through the motions so that I appear to be good. No one can accuse me of not being a good religious person or a good person. I know how to have this outward I did the right thing, don't accuse me of anything, but my heart's far away, which is exactly what we're seeing in this picture. And it's a good reminder to us that God really sees what's going on in the heart of our worship. He really sees through it. Clearly, he's seeing through it in Cain. And this is probably one of the most profound moments where God reaches right through it. Jesus would pick up on this, and Jesus, you may recall at one time, he quotes from the prophet Isaiah, who had spoken of this, when he accuses many of the religious people, and he says, while your lips give me praise, your hearts are far away. So you might outwardly come with your song, you might know how to do things, but your heart's far away. And I think we have that depiction here. And it's a good challenge for us. You know, when I come to worship, when I come to God, the whole relationship with God, is it just a put on, or how much of it can become a put on? And it's so worth it to say, God, I don't want to go through the motions. Let's get real. I'll face you. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to see what you see in my heart. And if you need to show me something in my heart, show it to me this morning. I would encourage you, pray that prayer, and you'll gain so much more out of every day and every time you gather for worship. So we're reminded here that God sees these things. But ultimately, we see this coming down to this huge question that is dropped before Cain. He's now risen up, acted out, and killed his brother. I mean, if you learn any lesson here, learn the fact that if a sibling ever asks you to go in the fields with them, don't go. Right? Let's go out. I love that sentence. And he invited him out into the fields, and he killed him. It's like, well, that's kind of short. But he's done this, and so God comes to him with this grand question. And it's like, you can see God's just, what God's probably feeling at this point, because you could see it winding up. And he asks him a question that he puts before us like a 10-ton rock. Where's your brother? And you can just see Cain, standing before that question. And what does Cain do? Oh my gosh, God, he's dead. No, he doesn't. Look at the defiance in his heart that somehow can so relate to his brother and dismiss him and now try to do it with God. He actually says to God, I don't know where he is. I want to say, what an idiot. He's trying to fool God, but, I kind of like, oh yeah, that's, I do it too. We do it a lot more than we think. That's what's so penetrating. And then he's like, what? Am I my brother's keeper? I mean, there's this sense of like saying, what? I kind of resent you even asking me. Wow. How could he get to such a place? How does one reach a place in which they can see a brother, act upon them in such a way, and then somehow still feel so detached? I want to say this is incredibly dramatic, except I don't believe it really is. I think we murder people a lot more than we think from God's point of view. I think we're a lot more detached from how we really take responsibility for others than we think. And we might think, well, how could he be that? How does he? And I think part of it is how he sees him. Some have drawn upon the language of the names and suggested there may be something right there in the names Cain and Abel. Cain has different meanings. Some are like spears, some is the acquirer. They seem to reflect something of the strength of man and all its bravado. But the name Abel is the same use its word for just breath. Breath in the same way it's used like in Ecclesiastes where it says, but who is man? Man is just a breath that comes in one day and out the other. In other words, it's nothing. So Abel, in a sense, is like representing one who's seen as nothing, a mere breath. And some might say that in many ways that's how Cain came to see his brother as just nothing. And when you can see somebody as nothing, well, then you're free to really relate any way you want. The problem is they're not nothing. They're your brother. They're your sister. And it's going to come back. But if you and I can reduce people to nothing, and the truth is, nearly all the grand injustices of humanity begin with the ability to, or the choice to create people as nothing. We can run that through from, slavery through our own country, how can some people take other lives and try to treat them as some kind of a commodity? They'd have to be seen as animals, as you have to work into your own mind somehow that they're less than human. Well, if we feed them in troughs and we chain them together and we on and on and on, we can make them less than human, make them nothing. Same thing happens in human trafficking. The same thing happens in most genocides in human history. They begin that way. And so how was it that the Holocaust how could so many people allow there to be the genocide of these Jewish people? Well, really not by any means so different than the way we do it all the time in ways. They began to give this propaganda that we needed to protect the Aryan race, and so we needed to be we were threatened by anything other than that was lesser. And now let's just kind of refer to them as rodents. And when we can reach the point when we give them the language rodents, and the posters and propaganda carried that, then people don't identify that they're relating to one who bears the image of God, to a brother. They're not a brother anymore. There's something that should be cleared away, and the mindset can carry on. In Rwanda, the same thing happened when the Hutus called the Tutsis cockroaches, or a word that meant cockroach. And so they refer to cockroaches. You don't relate to them in the way you would other people. You relate to them as something to be cleared. Whatever your political view is in terms of abortion and its rights, wrongs, and how that should be play out, I think there's something that should be of tragic concern when we can name the creation of life something other than what it is. When we can refer to that as a fetus or a tissue that can be scraped away, and all of a sudden it doesn't need to be seen because it's not a life. It's just somehow some medical something else. The implications are huge. Or when a group like ISIS or extreme Muslims can, just like extreme Christians, can go and call a group something that needs to be eradicated, like infidels. When you can label people infidels, they're no longer fellow human beings who you have to work things out with any kind of respect. They're even able now to label their own fellow Muslims, some of them, as infidels. Worthy of what? Well, doesn't really matter. They're not humans, they're infidels. You've given them a new name. You've made them nothing. And you might think, well, I don't really make anybody nothing. And that's probably true to a degree. But I think that we do this in small ways all the time. And we lose a sense of the sacredness of other people. And I would ask you, who perhaps could become a nothing for you or become less than? Who might you see as it's not really the same? They're not really like my brother in the same way that I am of value. How about the little kid in class when you were a little kid, right? Maybe you were him, maybe you remember him. But that little kid, hey, he's just kind of there for us to pick on. He's not like the rest. I mean, we all like to pick on little Billy because it makes us feel better about ourselves. That's kind of what Billy's here for. Just for us to punch around, make jokes, because it's better we make them on him than us. What have we done? We've made little Billy nothing. It's okay to treat him that way because he's not quite like us. And I wonder how many times we do that in so many ways. Someone's homeless. Someone's an immigrant. We don't refer to them as a person. We don't refer to them as a person, a brother or sister who is homeless as their circumstances. We just refer to them as homeless. Then when something happens to them or to the immigrant or to somebody else, it's not quite the same as it happening to a brother. I don't have I can think about it differently, and there's the danger. And that's where we begin to see that things began to go for him. Perhaps he began to see his brother in that way. And so it is that God comes to him, and God says, "Where is your brother? Where's your brother?" And God says, "What?" And he gives these responses. And he's saying, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God comes back with something that I hope we're open to hearing, because I think it speaks volumes about how God sees it. He says, what have you done? His blood cries out from the ground. However you think you could have treated him, you have no idea what you've done. You've just killed my child, one who bears my image. And it cries out, and we see that the consequences become so devastating upon Cain. And if it's not clear to us, let me make it really clear and say it simply. God's answer to Cain, are you your brother's keeper, is yes. In big affirmative, yes. And his blood cries out. That doesn't mean you and I are responsible for everything that happens to somebody. You're not responsible for the hardships that everybody faces. You're not. Life is full of circumstances. And you're not responsible for the choices that other people make. We need to be clear on that. Because otherwise, I think our fear of caring about people is we feel like it's too much. And that's a lot of us carry because we think we're God anyways, and we try to control life as if we're God. And then, of course, I don't want to care about anybody because if I'm God, that's way too big, you know. And so we kind of, no, we're not responsible for the circumstances and the choices. We're responsible for how we can relate to them within our own means. That we're responsible for. How we choose to relate to them. And that's what really is being brought to bear for him. And I know that can be hard because we live in this kind of hyper-individualistic time where now we kind of feel like, well, we talk about global community and like everybody is our brother and sister. And that can be good to a degree. There's a healthiness of our globalization. But it's ironic that at the same time we have this hyper-individualism going on that's kind of like, oh, we're all interconnected. But in terms of how we live, I don't want to be responsible or obligated to anyone. So let's just agree to this. We're all connected, but you do what you want to do, I'll do what I want to do, and no obligations with each other. Is that cool? That's kind of how we want to live. The problem is it's just not real. We actually have got to face the fact that we do have this interconnection. If I'm driving the car and I decide I want to text, it's a good chance I'll kill you or kill somebody. It's a good chance. It really ups things. I can't just make that choice without having implications for that. That's why people start thinking about things like, you know, even the commodities we buy, we're realizing, well, we're a little bit more interrelated than we kind of thought. Like if I purchase clothing that really the way, what was involved with it, how it was made, I can't disconnect. Or why people choose to buy coffee that's fair trade, which is really a way of saying that they make sure that the people who are having to work these fields are earning a livable, respectful kind of wage. So people buy fair trade coffee. That's what it means. It's a way of identifying the fact that truly, actually, our choices that we have do affect one another. And they do so in lots of different ways. In his message that was given at the National Cathedral in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King, he kind of captured this truth when he said this. He said, "Through our scientific and technological genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not had the ethical commitment to make of it a brotherhood. But somehow and in some way, we have got to do this. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. We are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." How important that we have to hear something of these words, because they remind us that really we're living in this Los Angeles, this place where we all want to believe that somehow all of our diversity can come together, and in some ways it so beautifully does. Maybe in some ways it has more potential than almost anywhere else on the face of the earth and through human history. It's a rare thing to live here, but we also live as those who know that it's not been quite as the melting pot. We haven't quite figured out how. We really face a whole lot of tensions. And when we think of things like the incidents in Ferguson, we have to stop and say, something isn't all so settled. And we're not responsible for why somebody shot somebody else, but we are responsible for what the issues underneath it. We are responsible for hearing why some people live in fear, for the racial background and for other reasons. We are responsible for those things. And we must kind of be open to engaging those things, because there is this interrelationship that we have to identify. We can't withdraw. Or perhaps you're in conflict with someone. You just want to say, well, okay, they're my enemy, and we want to label somebody an enemy. We cannot merely cast somebody as an enemy and then think that they're less of a person. Listen to the words of Jesus when he said, that our ancestors were told, do not murder. And a murder must be brought to trial. But I promise you that if you are angry with someone, you will have to stand trial. If you call someone a fool, you will be taken to court. And if you say that someone is worthless, you will be in danger of the fires of hell. Wow. He really is pressing out the reality of what Cain did. He's making it very clear that when you make somebody an enemy and try to make them worthless, when you disregard them like that, you are the one who will face these grand consequences, because you are in total opposition and defiance of God in ways that you may not even realize. But you cannot carry on that way. And we all know that when we're in conflict, we feel this freedom to just have total disregard. We want to go talk to about 20 people about it and get everyone on our side and make them and bash them. And he's saying, you've got to honor even those you're in conflict with. You've got to find ways to at least seek out honorable ways to relate, or you're going to face grave consequences. And this is precisely what we see God doing as he engages Cain. We might wonder, well, how could Cain reach the point where he would kill his brother? I guess he's just a murderer. We could say that. That's it. Cain's a murderer. That doesn't really help, because we all at some level. But what's beneath that? Well, he has anger issues. That's it. Cain has some serious anger issues. And if he goes to anger management, I think that'll take care of it. We just send him off there. I want to suggest to you that at the root of it, isn't there differences? Differences divide us all the time, but why do they divide us? They don't have to. And the issue isn't even his anger, because anger itself isn't always going to lead to wrong. What's beneath anger? What's the driving force? And I want to suggest to you that what we find is that beneath it all is his broken relationship with the security and significance that only God can give. In other words, his own insecurity that he's not dealing with. Think and hear the words that God brings to him. When he first comes to him, God sees this happening, and he sees how it's going to play out, and he sees how it's going to play out with us. In verse 6 it said, then the Lord said to Cain, this is the very beginning, when you can see Cain reacting, and it says, why are you angry? That's a great question. It's one we don't really like, especially when we're angry. We don't like somebody to say, why are you angry? Shut up, man. I have a right to be angry. It's like, but why? I don't want to answer that, because what we want to say is it's all about them. It's so obvious. It's not about me, and anger just projects everything onto the other. No one wants to be asked why they're angry, because there might be some roots about us. But God comes and says, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, focus on yourself, will you not be accepted? But if you don't deal with it, if you don't seek that acceptance, and the only way you can find it, which is to get right with me, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it. He's saying here that, in essence, he's saying, you have got to work on us being right. You've got to seek out me, and I am the source of life and love, and if you're secure in me, you'll be able to operate rightly with him. But if you don't, this thing is going to consume you. Because insecure people kill people in one way or another. Wounded people wound others. Hurt people hurt people. But to take it more seriously, we can only be rooted in God, or we will act out this way. We typically think that the people who oppress others are the bullies. They're superior. Or it's the big oppressive, Hitlers or dictators in the world. They oppress people because of their superiority or their sense of it. There's a lot of truth to that, but go down one layer below that. Any sense of superiority, I would suggest to you, is always rooted in insecurity. The reason somebody feels they have to have and carry on and embrace the sense of superiority is because they don't feel at peace. Find me someone who's deeply secure, and you'll find someone who relates completely freely without any oppression, without any awkwardness, with a great freedom with anybody. Really secure people, deeply rooted in God, have a freedom to relate without the superiority and inferiority. They have a deep sense that I'm loved by God by grace, so I'm okay with myself, and I don't need you to be perfect, and I'm not threatened by you, and I don't need, but it's insecurity that will act out. And so God is coming to him, and he's pressing into that place to call it out, because he knows that if we don't deal with our insecurity, we're going to get more and more worked up, more and more dangerous. Which dogs bark the most? The really big ones or the little ones? It's the little ones, isn't it? You see those little terriers? They just go crazy. And they're on their leash like they're all brave, and you're like thinking, if that other guy let his dog off, you're gone, man. But on their little leash, man, because there's like this inferiority, and they just have to work it up. And that we can be the same way. The more insecure we feel, the more that we seem to act out and we're so uptight, we're so unable to really relate well. And I would say to you, we have to be honest about that. We can start to really move in what God's doing as we are honest about our own sense of not being so secure, feeling a little threatened. See, our differences typically divide us because I see you as different, and that threatens me. If it makes me feel a little insecure, our differences, I begin to see you as what? A threat. If we get honest, there's a little bit of that can go on all the time. And it may be subtle and it may be small, but it's really the honest place we need to be in terms of conversing. When I see my black sister, there is something where I know there's a difference, and I don't know if I fully understand it. I know our history is different. I know the experience of difference. I know history has created that, and there's an awkwardness. And so no matter how much I want to, it's like, is that threatening to me because it makes me feel a little less secure in how to relate across that, because I know there's this difference. If I see Wendy here as my sister, or my wife as a woman, relating as a man to a woman, oh, come on. Men have always found women dangerously mysterious. We don't know what to do. So what do? We oppress them because we don't know how to relate. And women can in turn say, all men are just pigs, all right? You've just made us nothing because you've just categorized us as pigs. And even if there's truth in it, you could see how it plays out. We're awkward with our differences. And so suddenly we really dismiss somebody who's made and bears God's image. We have to have a conversation where we can change the way that we talk. The way that our culture is talking more and more, it's all kind of about political categories or positions. Listen, there'll be like an hour show on TV, some talk show, where they're talking about whether this person's comments make them a racist. I find after a while I'm kind of tired of spending an hour discussing whether this guy should be labeled a racist because of his comments. After a while it's like, really? We are all prejudiced. What fruit is there except for hiding? Spend hours talking about one person's comments. Why don't we just start talking about our own insecurities, about our own struggles to relate? We all have prejudices. I hope that doesn't, but we all have elements in which we're prejudice might not be the right word, but we have a sense in which we feel threatened by our differences. And that threat causes us to relate in destructive ways that are completely destructive to what God is doing and created. And we need to be able to talk. I need to be able to say, help me to be able to relate. Because it is awkward, and I want to be able to relate rightly as family or to a woman and be able to talk. I tell you, if men and women could get in a room and just say, hey, as a guy, this is how sometimes I feel about women. It's probably been really hard for you. Can you tell me how it's hard to relate to men? The women would have a lot of things they want to say, and they'd be glad that maybe some men would listen. And men could share, and I'll tell you, we'd start learning how to answer the question, who is my brother? and equally implied, who is my sister? We need to be able to get past and engage that insecurity. And that is precisely what Christ calls us back to. Christ calls us back into life rerouted in God, which He provides for us, and which will lead to relating to others as equals in this God-intended family. Listen as we close to these words that John picks up as he writes one of his letters, what we read as 1 John, and an excerpt from that, where he describes it this way. He says, "This is the message you heard from the beginning, that we should love one another. Do not be like" who? Don't be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. That jealousy, he didn't deal with himself. In other words, it was his failure, nothing to do with his brother, even though we know it got put on him. We know that we have passed from death to life because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death. Anyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. If anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need and has no pity on him, there's nothing elicited in him, then how can the love of God be in him? Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with the actions and in truth. This then is how we know that we belong to the truth, and how we set our hearts at rest in His presence. We got at rest. When I'm secure in Him, I'm at rest, and I'm going to relax relating to you because you're not a threat. That's the place He's inviting us. And in the next chapter, He says, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Since God so loved us with grace and mercy, we also ought to love one another. We love because He first loved us." He knows here that it must flow from God. It's not something we're going to fix politically. We're not going to discover our brotherhood in some political way or some legal thing that demands that we relate, although it may help with justice. The deeper question is, how do we see others? And when I see myself in relationship to God, I can kind of relax and relate rightly as a white male, educated, whatever those traits are. I can relate out of them only rightly when all of it is brought kind of rightly before God, and then there is that ability. And this is what Christ came to do, to restore us rightly so that we would reveal to the world that the glory of God is once again breaking in and being revealed as people learn to honor the God-bearing quality in each other. This is why it's so vital. This is why Jesus says it's central. This is why that question is one that He takes up. He said that the whole success of this is what? That they will see how much you love each other. How do we change? By seeing how much we love each other. How did the Roman Empire and all of its oppression get broken out, and somehow what emerges is the movement of Christ in the midst of that oppression in the beginning? Because, as Tertullian once said, early writer and historian, he says, look, the whole Roman world looked at this small group, and they looked at them and said, look how they love one another. That's what he wrote. They were amazed at the way they cared for each other. Because in that whole genre of time, people were dismissed, especially non-official Roman citizens. They would just be dismissed and thrown out. But the way that this group of people cared about each other defied it. And that's the invitation of Jesus, to defy the powers of this world. Did you notice what God says about Cain? He says, you're going to be overtaken. There is a power at work in this world that wants you to rise up and do something like kill your brother. Did you notice what John said? He said, Cain was taken by the evil one. There are the force of this world, the ruler of this world, if you will, who's on his way out, but he's been ruling and defeated, but still trying to rule this world, who we call Satan or the devil. That power wants to cause us to dismiss the image of God in others and not feel any relationship to them and just make it about us. It's great, because then we can all go around pretending like we love God, but it will have no effect because it's very clear we don't. That's what the enemy knows. And so Jesus comes to radically break through that and say, guess what? You and I have the same Father. And when He restores that, He changes everything. to make us realize we have the same Father and we're bound as brothers and sisters. It changes everything. So let me suggest something to you as you ponder the thought of, maybe going to a home church this week, and you think, wow, I really could. It'd be really good to gather with people. And you might realize, I need it. If I'm going to grow, I need to be in some kind of process where I get known, where I engage some questions, where people can pray for me. If I don't, I'm going to linger out here on the sidelines. That's a good reason to go. But let me just encourage you to think a little more, even more dynamically about the idea of going to home church. If you understand that our coming together across our differences is actually the most spiritually subversive thing that we can do. Because from God's point of view, the world is divided immediately, and Jesus is coming to bring us back across all our differences, and says when that happens, it is a force that's coming against the influence and the authorities of spiritual powers in this world. To go to a group and gather across our differences is one of the most spiritually defiant things we do. By defiant, I mean good, like defying the powers that rule and evil in this world. Because that's, and only that, is when we actually start to say, I'm going to share life with you. See, coming together in a house or having a meal, Jesus understood it. That's why, how he was crucified? He was crucified as much because he actually had meals with sinners. That's as much why. Because to have a meal is to say, no, I'm including them in my world. They are still ultimately to be my brothers and sisters. When you do that, like Jesus did, it is pressing against an enemy. So you could go to a group and let's say Thursday or Friday later this week, at your workplace or your friends on the phone, what'd you do last night? Oh, you could say I got a home church, but I want to make a suggestion for your understanding and also for a great conversation. No, what'd you do last night? I went to a countercultural, subversive meeting of revolutionaries that are defying the rulers of this world. You'll have such a cool conversation, and it will be closer to the truth than saying anything else. Because when we gather and say, God is our Father, and we're daring to say that I submit all of my difference to that, and I'll meet you in the fact that I have to honor that in you, and it means I have to be real and more equal with you. When we do that, we are actually doing something very, very powerful spiritually. It may not be felt today all the time, but it is. Now, if you just meet with people because you like them, well, Jesus made it very clear. That's cool. It's fine. But it's when you're not always alike and liked, that's when it's even really cooler. Because that's when you start getting shaped by God. It's worth everything. And so I want to conclude by inviting us to recognize the significance of coming into that common place, that common life with God as we gather. And maybe you recognize this morning you've had conflict with somebody. and you've started to make them an enemy. And you can't in your mind, I won't even go there. You shouldn't even go there. You know in your mind where you'd go. And you've been talking to a lot of other people about them to make sure you kind of bring them down. Jesus said, no, it's time for you to start honoring the way that you honor in conflict. You go directly to them. You honor them. You keep it trustworthy so that you go direct. Stop relating to them in this dishonorable way. So you have to think about the conflict you have. You might think about people that you pass by. Maybe there's some people in the way you pass them by, you think, you know what, I can't help everybody, but there's some people I could have helped, and I need to stop and be more aware that they are the God-intended family in this world. And I want to invite us to come to the table as we close here. And we have a great retreat. I mean, the whole retreat's themed, a place at the table, because we're going to take this up. We're going to talk about what does it mean to belong in this current culture where it's awkward. I mean, none of us want to talk about one period of life, right? It's called middle school. That's where it starts, like, middle school. I don't think we ever quite come out of it. So we're going to talk about what's it mean like to go back and find how we can rightfully find a place at the table of life with God. It's going to be fun. We're going to do some fun stuff, and we're just going to have a lot of freedom and stuff too. But I want to encourage you to come to that, but also to come to a home group, but also now to just stop and say, I want to join what God's done. He's the one who's initiated meeting me and meeting us. You see, Cain was the brother who rose up and killed his brother. And it created this wandering You see what God said? You're going to be like a one. You're never going to now have life with other people in the right way. Jesus does the opposite. Jesus is the brother who rises up and lays down his life for us, his brothers and sisters, so that we're not wandering, but we can come home and have home with the Father. And so I want to close by receiving his body given for us, his blood given for us, the elements of communion. I'm going to ask if there's any home group leaders or elders who could go back real quick and join Steffi back here with the elements. We're going to pass those in a moment as we close. And if you feel like, I don't know where I stand with Jesus, I don't know where my beliefs are at, please let the elements pass by. There's no shame in that. But if you have received his life given for you and his body and his blood poured out for you, then I want to invite you to receive these elements. And we're going to do it this way. We're going to pass the cups before we close here, and the matzah. And just take it, but don't consume it yet. I want to ask you to just hold on to it as we pass this out. And then we're going to take it together as identifying our common life with God. So I'm going to invite those who have the elements to begin to pass those. And as they do, I invite you to begin to just have a few minutes now where you might just say, gosh, how do I answer the question, where's my brother? Maybe you need to talk to God about someone you have conflict with. Maybe you need to think about some people that you've made nothing. You guys can go ahead and begin passing those. Maybe there's those you've thought about as having nothing. Maybe God's, just impressing upon you your own sense of insecurity. And if there's anything I want you to receive this morning, and we will as we take this in a moment, just hold on to the elements as they're passed. It's to receive that Jesus comes to give us life, shared life together, and you're included in it. You're secure in it by what he's done. And that security would be your force to be able to love others. So I just invite you to reflect on this.